I acquired this archive of historic materials on eBay from a seller out of Washington, D.C. called Bakari Archive. The materials span the years 1950 to 1989 and are organized into three categories: 46 issues and national notes, which was the organization's quarterly publication, which started in 1897, historical records of the National Association conventions, constitutions, and bylaws, affiliates, dated publications of these documents that span from 1948 to 1988, and various miscellaneous historical documents, including photographs, newspaper clippings, awards, scrapbooks, letters, deeds, brochures. In examining these materials, I'm looking through the lens of collective memory. One of my favorite pieces in this collection is a scrapbook that was created by the Florida Club women. Um, these archives are essential in preserving that history and providing access. Archives like this preserve the original and primary source documents to protect the truth, because the words and experiences of the organization can speak for themselves against revisionist history. And even the preservation and accessibility of these documents can prevent erasure. This video is one way in which I'm sharing that history with the public. So the National Association of Colored Women's Club, also known as NACWC, was formed through the merging of the National Federation of Afro-American Women and the Women's Era Club in 1896. They had the motto, "Lifting as we climb." This organization has become the largest and most influential organization of Black women during the early 20th century. It addressed issues ignored by white women's groups and Black men's groups. So the overall goal of this video is to provide an overview of some of the materials in this archival collection and highlight items of interest and historical significance. As a disclaimer, I'm not a trained archivist or historian, so the items that will be featured were selected through the lens of a collector and the legacy of Black teachers who led and supported this organization at all levels. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, whatever the time is where you are at. So welcome to my YouTube channel, Seeing Myself on the Shelf. This video is going to be one of many, which I'm calling Seeing Myself on the Shelf Archives. This archive will feature documents and materials from an archive I acquired on eBay for the National Association of Colored Women's Club. So this video will be split up in a couple of videos because of the sheer size of the materials that are in the archive. So this first video is going to focus on the source of this collection, as well as how the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, I'll often refer to that as NACWC, and their relationships with past presidents, as documented in the documents that I have. So first up, this collection, however many hands that it passed through, wouldn't be possible without the archival work and the historical work and collection of Mrs. Minnie M. Nelson. And Miss Nelson was the president of the Irene McCoy Gaines Club, which was in Washington, D.C. She was the second recording secretary of the Northwest region. She was the historian for her club, as well as for the national organization of the club women. She was chairman of publicity, and she became affiliated with NACWC in 1957, and she would go on to serve well over 20 years. And in her time, and this is an older picture of her, this was in the collection, quite large picture, but during her over 20 plus years, throughout many of the National Notes magazines, she's written articles. She was key in the historical book that was put together On NACWC, she provided a lot of the source materials to Charles H. Wesley, who wrote the history of the NACWC. Um, and she was also given many awards due to her service. So in the collection, this is a letter from the NACWC informing her, and this letter is dated April 26, 1970. And if I can hold it up so you all can see. And I have on these archival gloves, or I'm calling them archival gloves, so that some of these documents are quite brittle. And so, in order to avoid any more deterioration of the documents, I am using these gloves. So, this letter says, Dear Miss Nelson, you have been selected to receive the Distinguished Club Women's Award from the National Association of Colored Women's Club. This award is given in recognition of your devoted service to the organization. We hope you will accept the certificate with our deepest appreciation for past support and our hope for continued interest. Yours for Lifting as We Climb, which of course is the motto for NACWC. And this was signed by Miss Myrtle Allison. And she was the club president, the national president at the time. So this is the letter informing her of the award. And this is the actual certificate for the award. And so when she received this award, this was on November 25th, 1989, 20 years of service to Washington and vicinity Federation of Women's Clubs. In addition to this certificate, she was also awarded this plaque. So it says, Certificate of Appreciation awarded to Minnie M. Nelson for outstanding and dedicated service. And of course, it has the branch that she belonged to. She was based out of Washington, D.C. And so the club she was part of, the Northeastern Federation of Women's Clubs. And it has the date, of course, which is July 24th, 1981, in Washington, D.C. In addition to that, she was also featured on the cover of one of the National Notes magazines. Of course, this is a younger picture of Miss Nelson. The picture that I showed initially was one of the more recent photographs towards in her later years. But this National Notes magazine is the 1985, summer fall 1985 um, edition of the National Notes. And also inside, there's an article about Miss Nelson, her history with the organization, a little bit of a background on her life. So again, I owe many thanks to Miss Nelson. These materials, um, I certainly would not have had them, and whoever else had them before me, due to her holding on to these documents, preserving these documents, and her work as a historian. So thank you, Miss Nelson, um, for this collection and for preserving these things. And so I wanted to start off a video really centering why these materials exist in the collection and how I came to get them and who is responsible for that work. So now I want to move on to the one of the things that was apparent in the documents that I have was that many of the past presidents had pretty good relationships with the presidents of NACWC. And that was very clear in the National Notes publications and some of the photos that I found where NACWC was instrumental in actually getting certain presidents to sign legislation. So the first one I'm going to talk about was under the leadership of Dr. Rosa L. Gragg. And so she was president during the Kennedy administration. So this magazine, National Notes, this is Winter Spring 1963. On the cover of it, you see President Kennedy here signing a bill. And this is Dr. Gragg here, president. So Rosa L. Gragg, in this magazine, the NACWC had ownership of Frederick Douglass's home. And so there, Rosa L. Gragg was very instrumental, and she originally is from Michigan, in working with her um, representatives in Congress at the time to try to pass a bill to where the Frederick Douglass home would be under the um, ownership of the federal government and excuse me, financial responsibility. And so she was instrumental in Kennedy actually signing that law that accepted the Frederick Douglass home as part of the National Historic Registry. And in this magazine, okay, this is the Frederick Douglass home. And this is a copy of the piece of legislation that was introduced for the federal government to assume financial responsibility for that Frederick Douglass home. And as you can see, it is signed by um, some of the congressional members that introduced this bill. And there'll be another video where I go more into depth on the significance of this home because there's a lot of documents related to that. And then, of course, there is the photograph, and this is titled Nation Accept Douglass Home. So you see Dr. Rosa L. Gragg there with President Kennedy when he signed that bill into law. And he also gave her the pin, which is ceremonial for presidents to do when people who are instrumental with a bill that gets passed. She's given that pin by President Kennedy once he signed it, accepting that Frederick Douglass home. In addition to that, inside the Frederick Douglass home, there was I believe a tintype um, of Lincoln. And so the club women took that, gifted that tintype of Lincoln to President Kennedy. And so you see here Rosa L. Gragg and some of the club women meeting with President Kennedy, gifting him that Lincoln tintype. And so Roselle Gregg was invited by President Kennedy several times for various occasions throughout his tenure, sadly, before he was assassinated. Um, she went there for a special ceremony that honored Vice President Johnson and other government officials. She was also invited to a reception for the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation and the gains made in the civil rights era. And then also when Kennedy was assassinated, she also took place, she also participated in a wreath placing ceremony on behalf of NACWC on President Kennedy's grave. More pictures of her. Again, this issue has more pictures of her attending events at the White House with President Kennedy. Hmm. And as I said, she did participate in a wreath laying ceremony. And I suppose that that was probably, as for a lot of the members of the country, an emotional time to have worked with President Kennedy um, on this bill and then, to have him assassinated. Um, so next, I'm going to go into Lyndon B. Johnson. So, of course, Lyndon B. Johnson was President Kennedy's vice president. And once he was killed, Lyndon B. Johnson, or LBJ, took over. So, one of the things that LB, and this is the National Notes 1964 Winter Spring issue. So one of the things LBJ did when he took office was that he invited um, Dr. Gragg, who was the president of NCWC. He also invited Dorothy Height. She was the president of the National Council um, of Negro Women, and they were invited to the White House. And it was important for him. He really wanted to work with them in terms of his civil rights agenda. And so here's a picture of him meeting with them in the White House. And here, in the national notes, this is the National Notes Convention issued 1964. So here you see a photograph of Dr. Gragg. She's again in the White House, this time with President um, Johnson, and he's also signing a bill. So, and he's also given her a copy of that bill. So this is when he signed the Civil Rights Bill. So here she is, I'm sorry, in the white coat and getting that pen once he signed that bill into action. So there was correspondence that took place between him and his office and NACWC. Here's a copy of one such correspondence. Um, it says, this letter is to express our very deep appreciation to you for your excellent leadership, which you exerted in um, first developing the bill and later bringing to fruition the Frederick Douglass home as a national monument. Without your tireless energy, devotion, and persuasive ability, we may be certain that this project would not have resulted. Surely, future generations will remember your leadership in connection with this tremendous undertaking. I know I speak for the entire Douglass family when I express our gratitude and appreciation for your action with every good wish. I am sincerely yours. So this person was the chief program analyst at the National Institute of Mental Health. So this was the Department of Public Health. I'm sorry, not the White House. Um, and again, this is the same picture that I showed of her and Dorothy Height meeting with President Lyndon B. Johnson. So one of the things that they talked about, President Gragg, um, and Miss Dorothy Height, was the urgent need for child care programs for working mothers, training programs for young people and adults. Also, Dr. Gragg asked him to appoint Negro women to sub-cabinet and policy-making positions, as well as nominate a Negro woman to the United Nations as a delegate or as an alternate. So, um, as was on the cover, he did sign that civil rights bill, gave her the pen. As we know, LBJ established the Great Society programs. And the next president, Mamie B. Reese, was invited by Miss Lyndon B. Johnson to the project. So this is another national notes. This is May, June 1966. And in it is an article here. It says Alabama president co-host Miss Lyndon Johnson. Okay, so next, NACWC and the Nixon administration. So this national notes is January, February of 1969. The president at this time is Myrtle Allison. Um, and so she, as well as the past president, Rosa Gregg, they attended Nixon's inaugural ball. And this is an actual letter that they reproduced, which was the invitation to the inauguration. It says, in honor of the President of the United States and Miss Nixon and the Vice President of the United States and Mrs. Agnew, the inaugural committee 1969 requests the honor of your company at the inaugural ball. Monday evening, the 20th of January, 1969 at 9 o'clock, Washington, District of Columbia. Okay, so this is a copy of that invitation. And here are pictures of President Allison, Dr. Gragg, at that inauguration. Okay, here are more pictures of them at Nixon's inauguration. And this was inauguration ball. So of course we know the balls are more exclusive. Almost anyone could probably go to the inauguration. I know I was in a high school program. I went to the inauguration of George Bush um, in 2000. But this is the ball. And so, only certain people can attend those balls. So one of the things that surprised me about these documents is that one of the documents actually was an executive order that Nixon signed. Nixon was a Republican president, but he did sign an executive order. And in his statement, he says, and it's printed, this is the national notes, March, April 1969. So it says President Nixon, in his statement to the conference, said, I have today issued an executive order directing the Secretary of Commerce to coordinate federal programs related to the strengthening of minority business enterprise and authorizing him to take the necessary steps to do so effectively. Okay. So Nixon signed an executive order to strengthen minority business. Okay, so the next administration is NACWC and the Carter administration. So this is the national notes April, May, June, spring of 1978. Okay. And this is a picture of the headquarters at the front. But one of the things that was in here, another surprise, is we know Carter was a Democratic um, president. And so there's a statement in here. It says, this is titled Women, Welfare, and Poverty. Okay, so the NACWC looked at some of the welfare reforms that the Carter administration was trying to do at the time. And so in here it says, we oppose the Carter administration proposal for welfare reform, HR 9030, which among other things eliminates food stamps, threatens to eliminate CETA training and CETA jobs paying more than minimum wage, and does not guarantee adequate daycare. And we oppose proposals for a quote unquote workfare, where welfare mothers will be forced to quote unquote work off their grants, which is work without wage, without fringe benefits or bargaining rights, and without dignity. HR 9030 further requires those individuals and families without income to wait weeks or even months before even an inadequate grant is available. And then they go on to talk about what they do support and what they would like that type of welfare reform to look like. The next document, this is National Notes 1980. And it's got the current president, Otelia Champion, on it. She's the 21st national president at this point in 1980. So, still underneath the Carter administration, one of the things that they urged the women to do was to pay attention to the Equal Rights Amendment. Okay, so they have a passage in here talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. Um, and NACWC voted to support the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, and created a plan to persuade support from around the country. Okay, and so in here is their plan for support of that. And they were urging women, the club women, to support this. Okay, so the next administration is Ronald Reagan. So one of the photographs that was in this archive was President Champion attended Ronald Reagan's inauguration. And at the bottom here it says, inauguration, January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan, 40th President of the United States, and George Bush, 43rd Vice President of the United States. And we know George Bush does go on to become president, but started off as Ronald Reagan's vice president. And so this is the women here at the inauguration. So during Ronald Reagan's administration, this national notes, this was December 1981, has a nice red for December. One of the things they were urging the women is to keep an eye on the 1965 Voting Act extension. So even back then, voting rights were still something that unfortunately people were fighting for. So in this, they talk about that the Reagan administration wanted to add a quote unquote intent amendment, stating that a claimant would have to prove that the state intended to inflict injury and acted deliberately in a biased manner as it relates to voting rights. NACWC was skeptical of this amendment and did not believe that the Voting Rights Act extension should be watered down. They said we will have to fight to keep our voting rights. And to apropos for the time, because President Trump is trying to pass the SAVE Act, which would further restrict large segments of the population from voting. And we should all be skeptical of that. Um, in this document, August 1981 National Notes, Solidarity Blitz Vote, you can see they're really pulling up vote. They have an article here where it says playing ruthless games. Okay, it's a pretty strong title. It says there can be little doubt that the Republican administration in Washington is playing a ruthless game with the Social Security system. All right, now we're talking about Social Security. People who have been paying into Social Security since it began in 1936 have long been concerned with politicians playing games with the working person's money. It is clearly necessary that Congress must transfer some money within the Social Security system to keep the basic trust fund from running dry next year. But the United States Senate last week refused to transfer the funds. It is an hour for the Democratic Party and public pressure to make their voices heard because the health and lives of millions of elderly are at stake. Okay. And today we know that there's ruthless games being played with people's health care and things like that. So concludes what I'm going to present of the archives as it relates to the relationships that some of the past presidents had, past presidents of NACWC with presidents of the United States. So stay tuned. The next videos, I'm going to go into the Frederick Douglass Memorial and Industrial Association and how NACWC acquired the Frederick Douglass House, and how it was transferred to the federal government. I'm also going to talk about special programs and initiatives of NACWC. So there'll be two other videos, or it could be one. We'll see what the time is looking like. But thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, subscribe. If there are things that you have a question on as it relates to these materials or NACWC, please comment below and I will get back to you. Thank you.